There's a question that sits in a specific kind of silence. Nobody asks it out loud, not directly, but you feel it in the pause after someone mentions their ex, in the way a conversation about dating suddenly turns toward you, in the slight recalibration on someone's face when they realize you've never been in one. Not a real one, not the kind with a label and a history and someone who knew your middle name and your 2 a.m. voice. And in that pause, in that fraction of a second before the conversation moves on, an entire internal monologue runs. Is there something wrong with me? Why has this been so easy for everyone else? What do they see that I don't? Today we are going to sit inside that question. Not to fix it, not to give you a 5-step plan to get a partner by Thursday, but to finally look honestly at what the psychology actually says about people who arrive at adulthood without a relationship behind them. Because what you find is not what you expect. First, let's talk about the story society tells. From the moment you are old enough to watch a film, read a book, scroll through any form of media, the message is consistent and relentless. Romantic love is the primary plot, not one of the plots, the plot, the thing that makes a life meaningful, the arrival point, the proof that you are lovable, that you are chosen, that you have been seen by another human being and found worthy of staying for. And so by the time most people reach their 20s, they have absorbed something that feels like fact, but is actually just a story. That a relationship is a measurement of your worth. That never having been in one means the measurement came back low. This is not psychology. This is mythology, and it is causing an enormous amount of quiet, unnecessary suffering. Now let's talk about who actually ends up here and why. Because the assumption, the one that lives in that uncomfortable pause, is that people who have never been in a relationship must lack something: social skill, attractiveness, confidence, warmth. But when researchers actually study this group, what they find is far more interesting. The first profile is what I call the deep processor. This is someone who does not experience attraction casually. While the people around them were cycling through situationships and short relationships in their teens and early 20s, this person was watching, feeling things deeply but rarely, waiting not strategically, not from fear, but because shallow connection genuinely does not interest them. They would rather be alone than be with someone who doesn't actually see them. And so they wait, and the world, moving at its usual pace, looks at the waiting and calls it a problem. It isn't a problem. It is a standard, a high one, and high standards, worn without apology, are not a flaw. The second profile is the late bloomer, and this one is more common than anyone admits. Development is not linear. Social confidence, emotional readiness, the capacity for real intimacy, these things do not arrive on a fixed schedule. They arrive when the internal groundwork has been laid. Some people are doing that groundwork later, not because they are behind, but because their particular combination of temperament, environment, and experience means they needed more time before they could show up in a relationship as a whole person rather than a half-formed one. Here is what the research on late bloomers consistently shows. The relationships they eventually form tend to be more stable, more intentional, more genuinely chosen, because they didn't stumble into love out of social pressure or teenage proximity. They arrived there with some self-knowledge already in place. The timing looked like a disadvantage. The outcome often isn't. The third profile is the most complicated one to talk about: the self-protector. This is someone who has looked at relationships, in their family, in their friendships, in every story they've absorbed about love, and made a quiet, unconscious calculation. The cost looks very high. Maybe they watched their parents' marriage and took notes that their brain filed under "love means losing yourself." Maybe they experienced rejection early enough and deeply enough that the nervous system made a rule: don't try. Trying is dangerous. Or maybe nothing dramatic happened at all. Maybe they just have an attachment style, anxious, avoidant, or a complicated mixture of both, that makes the early stages of intimacy feel like standing at the edge of something very high. And so they pulled back before it started, again and again. Not because they don't want connection, because they want it so much that the possibility of losing it feels unsurvivable. Psychologists call this fear of intimacy, and it is not a character flaw. It is a protection strategy, built by a nervous system that was doing its job. But protection strategies have a shelf life, and when they outlive their usefulness, they stop keeping you safe. They start keeping you stuck. Now here's the thing I really want to say. All three of these profiles, the deep processor, the late bloomer, the self-protector, share one thing. They are all carrying a version of the same shame. A shame that was handed to them by a culture that decided without their input that a person without a relationship history is somehow unfinished. And I want to be very precise about something here. Shame and guilt are different things. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. And the person who has never been in a relationship is often carrying shame not about a specific choice or behavior, but about their very existence in this particular territory of life. That shame is not information. That shame is just a story that got in before you were old enough to question it. Here is what is actually true. Never having been in a relationship does not mean you are unlovable. It might mean you are selective. It might mean you are still growing into yourself. It might mean you have some walls that were built for good reasons and are ready to come down. But it does not mean what the pause in that conversation implies. It does not mean you are less. What it does mean, if you're willing to look at it honestly, is that you have an unusual opportunity. Most people enter their first relationship carrying no self-knowledge at all. They discover who they are through a series of relationships that are, frankly, more about pattern repetition than genuine choice. You have not done that yet, which means you can do something rare. You can decide, consciously, deliberately, what you actually want, what you actually need, what you are and are not willing to carry into something intimate. Not from fear, not from a checklist, but from genuine self-knowledge. That is not a disadvantage. That is a foundation. And the next time someone's face does that thing, that slight recalibration, you don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe anyone a history to prove you are worth knowing. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are just someone who hasn't found the right person to be brave for yet. And that is not a story of lack. That is a story still being written. See you in the next one.